Hi, and welcome everyone to Whole Soul School and Foundation's first Fireside Chats for July 2019. My name is Marie Mohler, and I am an author, intuitive, and co-founder of Whole Soul School and Foundation. I am here with my co-host and co-founder, Lacy Frazer, who is a clinical psychologist by training and a practicing life and leadership coach and consultant today. It feels good, Lacy, to be back this month in our Fireside Chats, sharing with our listeners about the journey of personal transformation and sharing in July in particular about the concept of embracing and accepting 100% responsibility for creating our reality. It's a big topic and a very important one. And so I welcome you, Lacy, to the call and to this powerful conversation today.
Good morning.
Good morning. And we welcome our listeners, whether you tune into us this month or whether you find us next year through a web search. These messages are part of all of our journeys as we awaken more to the truth of who we really are, and as we seek a more authentic and accessible language for the changes we are experiencing in our daily lives, in our local communities, and as a greater collective on the planet in the world today. So, Lacy, I think we wanted to talk a little bit about the blog article.
Yes, good morning, everyone. And I wanted to just remind our listeners that the month of July's theme is 100% responsibility for creating our reality. And every month I open the month with a blog article that introduces the theme. And this month's theme is very near and dear to my heart. It is a theme that builds on all the other themes, really, that we've talked about. And it's a very important theme because when you talk about taking 100% responsibility for creating your reality, it's not always an easy concept for people to really understand and take seriously. But I want to talk a little bit about its truth. Okay. So in the blog article, and we've talked about this before in our other podcasts, this understanding that our world is full of energy, that we are energetic beings living in an energetic universe, that everything has an energetic vibration, and that vibration insinuates that everything has a frequency, and that this frequency is emanating out of us into the universe and intermingling with each other's frequencies and other frequencies in the universe. And the most important quality about the frequency is that it is also magnetic. So it is pulling into our experience that which is an energetic match to itself.
Yeah.
So, from a scientific perspective, from a quantum physics perspective, we kind of have to say we're 100% responsible for creating our reality based on this principle, right? Because our thoughts have frequency, our feelings have frequency. We are putting out a frequency of vibration, and whatever is coming into our life, whatever person, place, experience, interaction, etc., is going to be a vibrational match to our frequency. So at the very base scientific level, we have to understand we're responsible for whatever's coming into our life, which is what we call our reality. Right?
Yeah.
And that is a very profound and expanded and large concept for many people to really understand, because a lot of us don't want to know that we've created our life circumstances, especially if our life circumstances are challenging or not pleasant for some reason. So, but when we can understand this, when we can really swallow this and take it in and practice it, which helps prove its truth, we start to really know and pay attention to what we are thinking about. And we are paying attention to what we are feeling, what emotion, what energy and motion is going on inside of us that we are putting out, right? We start paying attention to our behavior. We start paying attention to where we really are putting our attention on, right? If we are watching scary movies all the time, if we are reading murder mysteries, if we are hanging out with people who do a lot of gossiping and complaining, we are in that energy. And you got to know that what's going to come into your life and in your experience, whether you're aware of it or not, is going to be an energetic match to what energy you are putting out.
It's so true. And, all that you just described, Lacy, I think there's that phrase where attention goes, energy flows. So wherever we are putting our attention, even if we're not consciously aware that we're giving our attention to anything, we are actually summoning and magnetizing to ourselves exactly what we're focusing on.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to add, so for people who, it can be positive or negative,
right,
what our attention is focused on.
Right.
And so when we focus on things that at their root energy are more positive, we end up having a really great day, right? And many people think that's just random. It just randomly happens that you have this really great day and things just seem to line up for you. And you got that awesome parking spot at the grocery store, right? And then you just happen to run into a really good friend that you haven't seen in a while, and you had this great connection, and that felt fabulous. And just everything seems to go your way. It's that kind of day that you should buy a lottery ticket, where you just feel like you're feeling lucky. Everything seems to be wonderful, and you just ride the crest of that wave. Many people do, and have no idea that something in their energy field was actually vibrating that and emitting that energy that created that they really created that day,
right,
and they don't know that.
Right.
And the same is true, though,
yes,
for the opposite. So the contrast to that is when we're not feeling good and we wake up, kind of on the wrong side of the bed, as the expression goes,
right,
and you stumble into the shower and you stub your toe, and then the shampoo bottle falls on your head and spills all over the floor, and you just have one experience after another in your day. It tends to sort of snowball and gain some momentum. And then what most people do when we're not aware of ourselves as being living magnets, basically, is, we focus on all the bad things. So when we get to the office after those 4 or 5 unpleasant things that have happened to us already, now we're telling our coworkers about the rotten day that we've had so far, and it's going to be a bad day, right? And we have no idea that we're forecasting and asking, with our vibration and our magnetics, that's the kind of day we want to have. People think they're just, it doesn't mean anything, and you're just venting. But in reality, if you do that enough, that becomes your life experience. So,
exactly. And I think what's so powerful about what you said is really, in all that you said, there is the implication that we know we have the power to manage our energy in any given moment, right? And that's where our true power as human beings comes from, as spiritual beings having human experiences. It comes from the recognition that we truly are these generators of energy, and we are the master gatekeepers of that energy. And we can shift on a dime. I mean, we may be having a bad day, but if we understand that we have the power to shift our thought, and we have the power to shift our emotion, we have the power to shift our reality. And that is incredibly profound.
Well, and it's so exciting. So that's
so
why
exciting.
When you hear Lacy and I get excited about being 100% responsible, when we first were introduced to this concept ourselves, I can't say that we were as thrilled then as we are today, because we've seen it play out in our life experiences as being 100% true and precise and accurate every time. The universe is always listening, right? This magnetic universe is always listening to what our vibration is putting out, because it knows that we are these conscious creators, and we are really summoning and creating our experiences through the energies that we embody and embrace.
Marie, I wanted to just interject here and say that I'm so reminded of, I talk a lot on these podcasts about my experiences working with men in prison. And I did this program that was a year-long program, and I had 15 of the same men in the program for a year. And every single day, I began on day 1, I would pick somebody from the room and I would say, I want you to go up to the board and I want you to write, I am 100% responsible for my reality. Mm-hmm. And I did that on day 1. And I said, now every single day when I come in here to start group, I want somebody to have written this on the board. And they had no idea it always began with resistance to writing this on the board because they did not want to believe they were responsible for their life in any way.
Most people don't.
Right. And then what would happen over time is they would start to say, okay, all right, I get it. I'm responsible for being in prison. I'm responsible for my criminal activity. I get it. I'm responsible. Yeah. And it was sort of their initial stages of understanding that they were moving from blaming everybody else for their arrest or whatever it was to really owning their behavior that led to their arrest. And that was a big step for many of them. But what they didn't realize, and they slowly realized over time, is that when we moved into the module, the segment of the group in which we were talking about energy, and they really started to understand this, they couldn't race to that board fast enough to write that phrase on the board.
I bet.
Because they were starting to understand at the deepest level, at their core, they were responsible for everything. Yeah. And that really, you could see the shift once you really own responsibility for everything in your life through this field of energy and what we're talking about today. Your life can totally change. And I watched it change with these men. And I'm going to share a couple stories in a little bit that really illustrate that. But I just wanted to say, it begins with just be responsible in the moment. Be responsible today for your choices. Be aware of your thoughts. But really, as you get into this work and as you really understand the quantum physics of it, you start to feel so empowered to create a different life for yourself, especially obviously if you're unhappy or you're having challenges.
Yeah. No, it's huge. Well, so then I would say, Lacy, so why is this a challenge for so many of us to accept that we are 100% responsible for our reality? It really can be a hard pill to swallow for many of us, because most of us have been conditioned to blame something else, someone else outside of ourselves, for the aspects of our lives that we don't like or that we don't want to deal with.
Well, this is a really important point. And we spent the early months this year talking a lot about conditioning.
Yeah.
And conditioning, we are very, very conditioned from a very early age to blame everything outside of ourselves or blame things outside of ourselves for our negative emotional states, for the challenges in our life. And you don't have to look far to understand this. When you might have watched your parents blame each other or fight each other, but if you grew up in a household watching the news, the news is all about diffusing responsibility onto other countries, onto other presidents, onto everybody else. We go to school, right? And we're taught that other people are responsible for me feeling angry or me feeling ashamed or me feeling sad. So we are conditioned. Human beings are conditioned. We are shaped over time. And part of that shaping often involves externalizing blame. We are not taught at an early age to really own ourselves, own our emotions, own our behaviors, own our thoughts.
We're not empowered to do that.
No, not at all.
And we're actually reinforced to find these outlets for our blame. And that's a magnetic focus.
Right.
That is, when we are conditioned that way, we are creatures of habit. So when that's what we've seen in our whole life, in our family culture and in the school culture and our community cultures and the world culture, everybody is doing that. Nobody wants to go down this rabbit hole, but look at politicians. You know what I mean? It's always somebody else's fault, or somebody else isn't working with them to get XYZ accomplished, and it's their fault. Really, if we all could really make this big shift inside ourselves, because that's what the call is, the world would change. The world literally changes. Your world literally changes when you begin to flip the switch and move into this other realm of awareness, of personal awareness. that you are creating your life. And then you see circumstances align for you to have that better life, because the resistance that we pull into our experience magnetically when we're refusing to be responsible for things at the most basic level, it creates quite a vacuum. And the universe has to fill that vacuum. Right. So I know I'm talking a little bit bigger than just sort of the core essence, but there is a magnetism to all of this. And when we are in the cultural conditioning of being reinforced for blaming someone or something else outside of ourselves, that becomes a habitual pattern and a magnet and a vacuum, which is why for many of us, until we wake up to these truths, we keep creating unfortunate circumstances or things that just don't go our way, because we don't know that we have actually set the tone for this creative pattern in our life to summon unfortunate things into our life.
Right. And right. You know, one of the short-term reinforcements that you speak of is feeling better about ourselves in the moment. Right? Because if a challenging situation comes my way and I can blame somebody else for it, then I feel better about myself.
Right.
In that moment. Right? But I'm not realizing that I'm paying into the pot, paying into that vacuum, paying into that magnetic force that is going to pull more to me, more challenge to me, more
we get
whatever.
Kind of a false relief or a false power when we do that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and for that, temporarily, we ride that wave for a little bit, but always that feeling comes back because we see it over and over. When we have a pattern running, we get to see it again and again and again, and that's when you know you have either a conditioned belief system or a chosen belief system, one or the other, and the only difference between conditioned and chosen is awareness.
Right?
Yeah,
exactly.
That's the key. And you're either reacting to your life or you're creating your life. You're either conditioned into your life or you're actually step by step, thought by thought, choosing your life.
Or responding to your life.
Responding to your life.
You know, which is the root of responsibility. You're responding to your life.
Yes.
And I believe David Morgenstern, who I do my transformation talk with this month, that'll be released on the 15th, talks a lot about that.
Wow.
Powerful concept.
That is, right? Responding and responsibility.
Yeah. And, you know, so one other point I want to make about why people are resistant to owning responsibility is they really would have to give up their role as a victim. They'd have to give up their story, if you will, of being a victim. And again, for some people, this is not a pleasant thing to discuss, because it really means looking at the self, kind of this ruthless scrutiny of the self, to become aware of every thought and every feeling and every action as much as we can, and really understand that we are our own worst enemy a lot of the time, you know, and we don't have to walk through life as a victim.
Yeah.
We really, I mean, what you and I are so focused on in our coaching practices and on these podcasts is really trying to help people understand that they have power and that they are the creators of their life. And how can we help support you? How can we help empower you to step into the energy of creation and step out of the energy of being a victim?
Wow.
You know?
Exactly.
And that just gives me chills. And that's my passion, is to help people realize this, realize the power within to do this.
It is. It's incredibly powerful. And without that awareness, we're just running the stories that are so familiar to us. Right, by default. Through our conditioning. Right. And I was just going to point out, you know, again, remember earlier in the year we had some podcasts about the ego and the ego's defenses. You know, if you gain some of this awareness, if you've bounced into one of our podcasts or this one in particular, and you're hearing about having to let go of your stories, or at least take a good look at your stories, the first player in your life that is going to take absolute offense to that scrutiny is going to be your ego. Because it is your ego that responded to all the conditionings and had to create all these stories to give you some sense of understanding the world around you. So when you start scrutinizing those stories, the ego's world is about to crumble and may begin to fall apart. And so it's going to bring out what from our earlier defenses? When the ego is triggered, it's going to bring out its entire arsenal.
Yeah.
It has a huge plan for you as you try and pull those stories away.
Yeah.
And so really, this is not a battle with anybody else, and it's not really a battle, but it may feel like a little bit of a tug of war initially with our egos, because we're really just saying, and really rather than war with your ego, maybe you just want to have a conversation to say, well, let's put this story, let's put it out on the table and look at it transparently, and let's both look at it. And if you really started to unpack just one story that you've been telling yourself, the ego will not have much to say about that truth that makes you uncomfortable, whatever that story is. All it will do is try and deflect and bring out its defenses so that you end up talking to it about all that makes it uncomfortable versus talking about the facts of what the story actually is. And oftentimes the stories we've created aren't really based in any kind of true reality. They're just the story we needed it to be so we could feel better about ourselves.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, speaking of story, I definitely have two sort of story examples that I would like to share, because, it's one thing to talk about all of this and try to take it in and say, okay, but what does that really mean? Or how does that really apply to me? And I just find sharing some anecdotal stories very helpful in understanding the concept that we're trying to talk about. So I wanted to talk about this one particular client of mine who was in my group in the prison, and he was, I'm going to call him Mr. Smith. And Mr. Smith was at first a seemingly very quiet, introverted man. He would come to group each week, and he would not say much, and he appeared to be taking things in. And this man was highly educated. I believe he was a professional. Can't remember what field he was in, but he was in a professional field. And he was very quiet throughout the first couple months of the group, didn't say much. But I could feel, as I sat in the room with him, I could feel sort of this underlying anger, okay? When you can vibe somebody, you can sort of feel, when you walk in a room and you can sort of vibe people and feel what's going on. So I let him sort of be quiet for a little while, but in my group, you weren't allowed to be quiet for too long. So, but eventually, as he got comfortable, he began to speak more and more, and he would comment or give feedback or contribute to the conversation. But what I will say is that it became very evident fairly quickly when he started to speak that he was just seething with anger. And I started to notice a pattern that seething anger was often related or about authority figures. So you can imagine you're in prison, and you are surrounded by quote unquote authority figures, for everybody from the guards up to the warden. And then you expand that out, and you have prosecutors and defense attorneys and judges and everybody involved in the criminal justice system. And so this particular client was very, he knew he had the opportunity in group to what he thought probably he would call venting, and he was all about complaining and about what everybody else did to him and all the wrong that had been done to him. And it was often about all these authority figures. So we let that go on for a little bit, and then I started poking him a bit and really started to go at this anger, and where is this anger really coming from? Who is he really mad at? So we started it, in his immediate environment in the prison, and then we worked outwards to the people involved in his arrest and his conviction and his trial and all of those things. And then we started to go back in time a little bit and looked at his life. And he started talking about being in the military. And he started talking, and he really got going there. I mean, the fire in his belly and the anger just really erupted when he started talking about his experiences in the military. And
Wow.
how he was discriminated against and how he was victimized in a variety of ways. And it just went on and on and on. And it was, it was really evident that there was this thread of anger that he just lived in all the time. And it was kind of under the surface, because if you looked at him, he would smile in passing. He would say, "Hello, how are you?" He was very cordial. But underneath that was like Mount Vesuvius,
Wow.
And so we started listening about his time in the military. So you're hearing this pattern, this pattern of anger with authority, and we took it back, we took it back, we took it back. And I finally said to him, have you ever lived a time in your adult life when you weren't this angry at the world? And he said, "No, I haven't." And I said, "Well, when did you enlist in the military?" And it was very young. I think he was like 19 or 20 at the time. And at the time of the group, I think he was probably in his early 60s.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
So that's a long time.
Yeah.
And we took him all the way back to the time when he enlisted. And I tell you, Marie, what I did with him, I'll never forget the day I turned to him and I said, "So were you forced to go into the military?" "No." "Did your parents make you go into the military?" "No." "Did you, were you trying to get out of the house? Did you want to get your education paid for? Is that why you went into the military?" "No." And then I said, "Well, why did you go into the military?" And he said, I can't quite remember his exact words, but the essence was, "I just enlisted." And I said, "So you made the choice to enlist in the military. And did you know at the time what you were enlisting in?" "Well, of course I did, because he was educated, he has done his research, he knew what he was doing." And I said, so I want you, so who are you really angry at?" And that's what I took him to that question. Who are you really angry at here? All this anger for the last 40 years that underlies every emotion that you have. It's the way you treat people. It's the way you treat yourself. Who are you really angry at? And the silence was deafening. And then the tears came. And he started to realize that he enlisted. He made the choice that started the domino effect that set the course for the rest of his life, emotionally, in every way.
He had made the choice that set the condition to experience all of those conditions.
Yes. And it was...
He was the magnet that set that into motion.
Right. But when the really pivotal piece here is when he really owned it. When he owned, and I walked him through walking into the recruiting office, signing the piece of paper, signing up. He got it. All of a sudden, he knew that everything that came after that day was in his court.
Yes.
He had to own that.
Wow.
Right? He stepped into that. And I'm telling you, I can't even describe the shift in this person over the ensuing 6 months of our group together as he let that really sink in.
Wow.
When he really owned that, the anger, I don't want to say it disappeared in 24 hours completely, but it dissipated. And what came in its place was a sense of joy and empowerment. And I saw him laugh. I saw him smile. I saw him joke with his other brothers in the group. I got reports that he was much more open on the unit, that he was helping other people with things, that he had really come out of this isolated space. He stopped, quote unquote, hating people, and he started helping people and loving people. And it was just this blossoming that was really profound to watch. And it really came down to taking him to the place where he needed to really own his decision to step into that next step in his life, that next thing in his life, which led to his path, and all the anger that was threaded throughout that 40 years that was tied to that moment that he signed up for the military. It just went away.
Yeah.
And he talks about like getting his life back after that, feeling like a different person, feeling free.
Yes. It's so powerful because that other story he'd created, unconsciously so, and didn't know at the time that he enlisted that he was going to set all these events into action, right? He couldn't possibly have known where that was going to take him and that was going to magnetically create the life he had to live. But when we realize that at any point in any of our lives, we can go back, right? We can go back to that earlier point. And, in some ways, maybe therapy attempts to do this, but this is at a different level.
Yeah.
This is at a level of really directly connecting. Where did I give up responsibility?
Yes.
Right? Where did I lose my sense of self, that it wasn't me making those choices? Things were being done to me instead of my choosing. And all of us might have a different timeline for that, right? Some of us might have had this little blissful, euphoric childhood. I can't think of many of us having that completely blissful life because life is challenging.
Right.
But, maybe it's in college. But for some of us, it might be right out of the starting gates when we're little. 2, 3, 4. And that we really just came into a life where there was just challenge and adversity and everywhere we turned, and we had to learn how to survive. It goes back to those earlier podcasts that we did, that orientation to survive versus to thrive. And that's a very powerful story about that man.
Well,
and all the men who got to witness that journey he went through probably helped them reflect on,
where's my point of pivot?
Where's my point where I made some choices and wasn't aware that I needed to accept responsibility for that. And that word keeps following all of our conversations, Lacy, that word, awareness. It is awareness that brings understanding, that brings the liberation.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. And that is why we're doing what we're doing.
Yes.
Is to there's not an ounce of judgment in anything you and I are talking about. It is simply to help provide a context for the importance of gaining awareness of self, awareness of others, awareness of the universe, awareness of all of this. And you can choose to listen and take it in or not. It's
right. And everybody has the right timing. Had you had that conversation with Mr. Smith 20 years before, he might not have had enough opportunities to be angry yet. He really had to play that out with himself. So in the timing of how he arrived to you, he was more ready. There are probably many other Mr. Smiths in that prison that did not sign up for your group because they weren't ready to hear these messages and they weren't ready to let it go.
Right.
They weren't ready for the awareness, I guess I would say. And something in Mr. Smith had journeyed his course with all of that, and he was ready for a new story.
Yeah.
And did he sign up for your group and sign his name and he enlisted again? Did he even think about that? He enlisted in your group
he had a
redo. By choice.
Right.
And this was a redo of his enlistment.
Right. I think there was probably at some point where he was so angry that he signed up for this group because he had to hear all of this stuff, and then we had to point it out that he signed up and do it all over again. So that's a good point.
We do. We have these redos, and that's showing us at a deeper level, I would say at a soul level, that we're ready for a new story. Yeah. We're ready for something different, and we're ready to retire that old story.
Yeah.
And you had another story.
Well,
Lacy.
I do, and I just want to say too, and this will be evident in this next story, but as well, The next step after owning responsibility, especially for Mr. Smith and the next client I'm going to talk about, this next step after really owning that is then being able to forgive yourself for the decision you made.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different piece and a whole different conversation. But I just want to say, kind of, there may be people out there who say, well, that's great, but what's next, and it's really, that next piece is really forgiving yourself for making a decision that you didn't know you were quite making that was going to have the ramifications it had, because people they start to beat themselves up. Then if they start to own responsibility, then they get mad at themselves and they start to really, turn that inward. But the real key, the next step to that is then owning, and then forgiving and letting go and moving into a place of empowerment.
And I would just quickly add to that piece, and probably there are some sub-conversations to this conversation, like forgiveness. But I would say there is something that I don't know if there's a name for it, and I'm a pretty good energy reader. But there is something that settles into our energy field. I'm not sure if that's just called clearing. There's something at kind of a quantum level that neutralizes our magnetism of our former story. And it happens almost without our having to do anything. Just awareness itself becomes a frequency that's like a big broom. And it just kind of sweeps away a lot of the energy, the tension that we'd been holding. And I've heard a number of people speak about it that work in the world of energy, that we are naturally buoyant beings. And so if you picture Mr. Smith as being a buoyant being, and we look at ourselves at the surface of the ocean, right, being completely buoyant and rising to the top,
right.
And with all that anger, he was down at the bottom of the sea.
Yeah.
And when you have awareness, and he found that place when he went all the way back to where his bitterness really began,
right,
which was the enlisting, and he had to call that to consciousness with your help. Well, all that happened with that awareness is he releases the stones or the weights that are holding him down at the bottom of the sea.
Yeah.
And he naturally rises to the surface, and he feels more free. And there are other steps like forgiveness, but part of what we do is we get this release because there's been something that's been holding us back from what we really are, which is light and free.
Right.
And then there are other steps that might still take a little more sweeping.
Right.
We might need that broom again to clear a little bit more out.
Right.
And I think that's where forgiveness comes in as a skill. And we should talk about that in another podcast.
Yeah.
But I think that's what happened to him. That's what's happened to me. I think that's happened to you in some of your life circumstances. And I would imagine a number of listeners on the call, if anybody can resonate with a time that you let something go.
Right.
You let it go. You cleared it out for you. You cleared it out for your own buoyancy. It's never about the other people. There are positive benefits if you let something go.
Right.
But it's really about you setting yourself free.
Right.
And when he was willing to set himself free, to look at that,
exactly,
then that hard pill to swallow becomes something that you're actually joyfully willing to embrace, because you can feel the freedom that's on the other side of the acceptance of that responsibility. Yes. And it becomes so accessible to you it's very clear that that's your next step.
Yes.
Right. And before that, there's this resistance. You can't make me be responsible. You can't make me accept that.
Right.
Why the hell would I want to be responsible for these terrible things that happened in my life? Right. But at some level of magnetism that's beyond our mental mind's comprehension, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
There is a level of responsibility for being a magnetic creator in our lives that just isn't taught to us in our conditioning and in our families and in the world we live in today. But I think it is going to become more a part of our conversations. And certainly, if you are a listener to Whole Soul School and Foundation, you are one of the lucky people who get to reclaim this in your conscious awareness.
Yes.
So I know you have another story.
I do.
It's another great story.
I do. So I have another client, a female client who has definitely given me permission to share the story on air, so to speak, but I will not use her name. So I'm going to go ahead and call her Julie. Okay. And when Julie called me up for coaching, she came to me in a state of frustration, in a state of anger, in a state of bitterness, much like Mr. Smith. And it was all directed at her husband. Really, they were separated, and they had not gotten a divorce. He would not sign the divorce papers. And she was just swimming in a pool of anger and resentment and bitterness at this man who she'd been married to for 17 years. And she could not get past all of this negative feelings she had toward her husband, and she really wanted some help in this area. So we started to talk about the relationship, and we got kind of deep into it. We started from the present and we worked backwards. And I let her kind of get out all of those things she was angry with him, and all the things he did to her, and all of the things that were an affront and offensive and non-helpful, and all of those things. And eventually, she said to me something, I'll never forget it. She said, I really knew that I never should have married him on the day we got married. She said, what happened was I intuitively knew this was not the man that I should marry. Mm. And I said, so you overrode your intuition on that day? And Wow. She said, I absolutely did. And I said, and so then every day since, in the 17 years of marriage, you overrode your intuition to leave. Mm. And she said, yes. And she let that sink in for a bit. And of course, I asked the famous question, so who are you really angry at? Mm. And she really took a long pause, and she got it. And she realized that she was deeply angry at herself for overriding her intuition for 17 years, and especially the root decision to marry him in the first place. And in that moment, I can just tell you, I felt in every fiber of my being her willingness. Like all of a sudden, she really, like all of the circumstances that she wanted to blame him for, fell away. Yes. And she knew that she really owned the responsibility for the marriage and for overriding the intuition for 17 years. And she had a moment of being really sad and angry with herself. And then we worked through that, and and I taught her about how perfect everything is, and this is what she's to learn. And do you know that once she was able to realize that, and once she was able to own it, and once she was able to forgive herself, the very next time she went to him and said, I want a divorce and here are the papers, he signed them.
That is so amazing. And such a perfect illustration of energy.
Exactly.
And the tension we create when we're not willing to look at the truth of what really is the real story, what really is the truth of our experience. And certainly this is a great illustration, Lacy. I don't know that it happens in every single circumstance in every perfect way, but at some level, the tension she was creating from having this awareness deep buried inside that she knew this wasn't the best path for her, and she did it anyway. She overrode that inner voice. And that's another podcast I just had with Sue Wells in our Mind, Body, Spirit, Fitness podcasts. The whole conversation was about inner discernment and listening to that inner voice. Right? And we do, because of our conditioning, often override that inner voice. We are not taught to honor that inner voice. And in fact, in many circumstances in school or as we're growing up, we are reinforced to not listen to that inner voice. And so we grow up to become adults who don't listen to that inner voice. And that sets up the conditions to blame everything else around us for the life that's not happy, for the life that's not working, for the life that feels disjointed in some way with who we really are, because we have forgotten or we refuse to see, or at some level we won't look at the choice we made that wasn't really for our highest good.
Right.
Because we just don't have that language. We're trying to bring it back through these conversations.
Right.
And there are many teachers in the world who talk about this as well. But that is so powerful. And I just wanted to comment, Lacy, when you started talking about Julie's story, you talked about she was swimming in her anger and she was swimming in her discomfort, or I can't remember the words you used, and her bitterness or frustration. She was swimming in that. If we go back to that, we are naturally buoyant beings.
I didn't even realize I had done that.
Right? And I was about to say, but you continued, that she was drowning in her frustration. I wouldn't say she was just swimming in it. She was literally drowning in the frustration and the energies of tension and anger and resistance that she had to her life circumstances.
Right.
And when you said you walked her back and you both did that journey to go back and then realizing that she was the one who overrode her instincts and her inner voice, there's that release. And her natural buoyant state rises.
Yes.
We naturally rise.
Yes, and I just want to add, that's such a beautiful analogy, because I when I texted her and asked her if she would mind if I shared this story on the podcast, she wrote and she said, "Are you kidding me? Of course you can, because you know what, Lacy?" She said what the amazing the I can't remember her wording, and I should have brought the text with me, but she said something to the effect of that the energy that was released when she realized that it was all her, was so profound, and that the relationship between this ex-husband and her has completely changed. They are amicable. They live a block from each other. They share custody of the children, and everything is working very, very well. And she said it's something I could never explain to anybody, but it was a profound experience.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it's so important to share these stories.
In the most positive way that story can help people,
right,
is that it's our lived experience that brings the knowledge, that brings the wisdom. So you can hear about our stories on Whole Soul School and Foundation, and you can hear other people's stories, but it really doesn't completely become real to you until you take that journey,
right,
and you go through the process of accepting 100% responsibility for all the different segments of your life where your natural buoyant state is being held back in some way into a heavier state of being, and we're carrying all that tension and all those wounds with us. And all we have to do is go back and realize that it's the responsibility factor and the awareness of our responsibility of ourselves as creator beings, of ourselves as magnetic beings, right?
Exactly.
We are magnetic beings.
Exactly.
And so, and we are creating our world through our energy and through our energetic choices.
Yeah.
It is so incredibly liberating.
So liberating. And that was probably the number one feedback and comment I got from the men who went through my program, because the program was all about this at its core, was that they would say, "I've never felt freer in my life. I can't believe I had to come to prison to free myself."
Yes.
Being in prison to find my freedom is not what I expected, but that is truly what happened. And
that is true for other people.
Yes.
For other people, that marriage that's incredibly difficult is their prison. Or that job that you really know you've known forever, and you might have been there 20 years, and you know that it's just not aligned with who you are, and yet you go in every single day and you ingest all the energies of how you truly feel about it, which is the anger and the resentment and the bitterness and not feeling valued or whatever it is but those become the prisons.
Right.
You're living in a house and a mortgage that you never wanted. The mortgage becomes your prison. Right? So there's so many ways we create these prisons so that we, as souls on a journey, can learn from ourselves how to free ourselves through awareness and understanding in these cosmic tools.
Yes.
It's so incredibly...
It's so exciting.
It
is I can, as somebody who just continues to do it, continues to learn from herself, continues to help coach other people, it's just such an exciting time to be alive and such exciting work to be a part of. So
it is.
To round out this podcast, I thought it might be helpful to bring up somebody who knows these principles very well, a man by the name of Jack Canfield, who wrote the famous Chicken Soup for the Soul books, along with Rick Hansen. And Jack Canfield speaks a lot about accepting responsibility. And I'm just going to quote him here. He said, if you want to be successful, you have to be 100% responsibility for, you have to take 100% responsibility for everything in your life. And that's responsibility for what works and responsibility for what doesn't work. And when I was...
All of it.
All of it. And when I was doing a little bit of research around his work, he puts out a free monthly Ask Jack Canfield teleseminar. And he has, in one particular free monthly seminar, he did this exercise where basically you ask yourself certain questions and you answer as honestly as you can. And it's even more powerful when you do it with another person. But these questions will help you kind of get at this concept of responsibility. And
kind of the how.
Yeah.
It's the how of how can you get at it if you're listening to this and you're not in a group or you're not having somebody facilitate this for you. You can almost self-facilitate that with Jack's
right.
Canfield. Not like I know Jack Canfield's
right.
questions.
Right.
Right. It kind of leads you through that process.
Yeah. So I thought it might be interesting to just, for our listeners to just, as we round this out, to go through these questions and answer them and
as an example.
As an example.
Of how it works. So how about...
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and start and I'll be the
responder.
The responder.
Who's responsible?
Who's responsible? I'll be the responder who's responsible for my responsible answers. Okay.
Lacy, what is a difficult or troubling situation in your life? That's number one.
I would have to say one of the things that causes stress or that is a challenge for me is regularly exercising. And this is really important to me because I'm a person of movement. I'm a person whose energy I need to be moving a lot to stay in the energy of forward movement. And when I don't get out or I don't exercise, I get stagnant and it's really hard for me physically. I get sort of sedentary and sometimes I get stuck in that sedentariness. And that's emotionally, spiritually, physically, that's kind of on all planes. Yeah. So exercise is kind of a way for me to keep myself moving. And I really have a challenge in establishing some kind of routine and getting out there.
Yeah. And as a magnet, just think about the energy of stagnation.
Yeah.
And I don't know, feeling blocked or feeling stuck in some way.
Yeah.
Our listeners can just imagine if it's not your experience, but you can imagine the experience of somebody else. If all of a sudden you're somebody who needs movement to feel good about yourself, when you're not creating the opportunity or the conditions for positive movement, then you can imagine what energy you're putting out every day.
Well, I think about, the vision that came to me as you were talking was a pond that's stagnant, that where the water isn't moving.
Wow.
What grows in the pond? Moss and weeds and all kinds of bacteria and
pleasant.
Right. So we won't go too far with that analogy, but you can feel that a pond that is stagnant is kind of nasty.
Right.
But once there's movement that's created, whether through
more like an ocean though, like the waves that are constantly creating movement.
There's a constant cleansing and there's a constant.
Right. So that's a really good analogy of the pond versus the ocean that's self-cleaning.
Right.
Right. So, so that was number one. What is a difficult or troubling situation in your life? Number two is how are you creating it or allowing it to happen?
Well, I would say that I'm not taking the steps needed to really prioritize it in my life, and I'm probably telling some kind of story that other things are more important than that. And so I'm not prioritizing time every single day for some movement that makes a difference.
And in a way, maybe another way to say that too might be that you're allowing distractions.
Yeah.
You're allowing distractions. That's another way. That's a more subtle way. Because distractions, again, if we're a victim of our story and we're a victim of our lives, distractions pull us away.
Right.
It's not really our fault we can't get there. It's all these other things.
Right.
Right? So that's one of the ego's very clever.
Crafty.
It's crafty. It is.
Yeah.
It is. And
Yep.
and with that magnetism, right? And it likes to sabotage sometimes. It will create the distractions
Right.
that you have to fulfill, which is the reason you can't get to the gym or you can't work out in some way. So, number 3, what are you pretending not to know?
That's deep. I think when it comes to exercise and getting out there, I don't know if I'm pretending not to know how important it is, or I know that it's related to self-sabotaging patterns. That when my ego can take an opportunity to sabotage a desire, it will do so. Mm-hmm. And so perhaps I'm pretending to not know the strength of my ego to sabotage.
The power of your ego and its patterns of sabotaging you.
Yeah. And that's hard to know about myself, and that's hard to talk about,
Yeah.
But that's probably what I'm pretending not to know.
Yeah. Yeah. And remember, this is something, it's interesting because we're talking about something that actually makes you feel good. This is not like
that's what's so strange
you
about
have to
it.
go, clean out a garage. I don't know, something,
Right.
I don't know, something that you really, really, really actually don't want. What's interesting is we're talking about an example of something you do want,
Right.
and yet the ego is still incredibly effective at keeping it at bay. So,
Good point.
pretending not to know the power of your ego is a very effective egoic strategy to keep you off course. Right? So that you never feel like you have that satisfaction and you stay in this place where your energy is something that's unhappy, it's dissatisfied, it's stagnant, or it's stuck.
Yeah.
And so, that seems to be the ego's job, is to keep us in that non-buoyant state. Right. And to keep you in that place, it's going to keep you distracted, and it's going to keep you not knowing about its methods.
Right. And I think you kind of just answered the next question in a way.
Sorry.
So go ahead and read it. And then...
So 4, what is the payoff for keeping it like this?
Well, and you just said, I think really it keeps the story going. It keeps the egoic story going that I just can't make it happen. I just can't make something that I want to do that's good for me, that's beneficial for me.
That's a story. That's quite a story.
Yeah.
I can't give myself something good that makes me feel good, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's keeping you in the contrasting cycles to feeling good.
Exactly. It just keeps you stuck.
Yeah. So that's the payoff to your ego.
To my ego. Exactly.
For keeping it like this. So number 5, what would you rather be experiencing?
Well, I'd rather be experiencing a greater sense of fitness, of movement, of strength. I want to be feeling better about myself. All those things make me feel better just in my physical body.
Well, and I feel like you have talked in some of the podcasts, maybe, or you certainly talked to me about it, that when you are at the gym and you actually get yourself there and there aren't these distractions that win, if we can call that the distractions win, when you actually create the movement,
right,
you're downloading a million ideas for all the other things that you enjoy in your life. So the working out and having that movement is not just about one thing. It's about your holistic health, right? Your physical health, your emotional health, your spiritual health, your passionate health, all the health of your passions, and your soul work and that kind of thing.
Right, exactly.
So you would rather be in the experience of having those downloads, of feeling fit on all levels of your being.
Right.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it does.
Right? You need to go to the gym.
Right after this.
Right. So, number 6, what actions will you take to create that?
So what actions would I take to create the feeling or to get the movement? I think one of the most important things for me, and this may not be for everybody, but I think I need to find and enlist an accountability partner. So really somebody who wants and appreciates movement as much as I do, and who wants to make it a priority in their life. And if I have somebody else that will help me, hold me accountable, I, of course, I am responsible, but having a partner to do that with, I think would be a tremendous help. And go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and of course, since this is a podcast all about 100% responsibility for creating our reality, if that accountability partner that you would choose is somebody that you know notoriously has their own sabotaging patterns,
Right.
then you would be 100% responsible for creating that condition. Well, I did get an accountability partner, and
But they're just not responsible.
They're not free to go, and so we just can't go.
Right.
Right. So even that is a secondary responsibility factor.
Right.
So, the ego is clever.
Yeah.
And it will create many tiers of its efforts and methods to ensure that you're not getting what you most desire that's going to be the best and highest good for you.
Yes.
So taking that action of an appropriate accountability partner, a passionate accountability partner,
Yes.
a committed accountability partner.
Right, not just anybody. Right.
So it's important how you change that language around how that action that you would take to create what you really want, is you have to consciously choose that partner.
Yes, and I also think I need to create a schedule, and for the whole world to see, So in a sense, I need to create a schedule maybe and put it on the refrigerator, and so my accountability partner and I agree on the schedule, and this is what we're going to do. So just doing some things that
help support you
exactly.
to be successful in this change.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
And number 7, which is the last one, by when will you take that action?
Now. I promise that when I get off this podcast, I'm going to put a system in place that helps support me with this decision, and I definitely am excited about moving forward in movement, because I do know, just talking about it, in such a positive way makes me realize, and really internalize how important it is in my life. And it will impact, it impacts when I do get into a schedule and a routine of exercising, like you were saying. It really impacts all levels of my being, which of course is energy that's going out and impacting everybody else. So when Lacy's happy and strong and fit,
everybody's happy. Right? But you see a lot of people in the public eye, or certainly a number of the positive speakers that I listen to. It's critical in their day. You can see, and we're not talking about this. Neither of us mentioned anything about weight loss,
right?
Diets, anything to do with that. This kind of spiritual fitness that we're talking about, this fortitude that comes from living your light and being tuned in and connected to yourself and what you need, is something that people who have gone through some of this journeying and mastered some of these elements of being 100% responsible for creating their reality, most of them have. I can't think of anybody that I listen to that doesn't mention in some of their podcasts or their webinars something about working out.
Right.
In their day.
Right.
And I think that movement creates the movement of energy,
right?
The movement of ideas, the movement of your manifestations.
Yes.
Good or bad, but
yes.
Right? And if you're focusing in your workouts on all that positive movement, that it's only reflecting back to you a more joyful, blessing-filled life, like it's whatever your language is around that it feels really good, that you're moving that energy and everything's lining you up with your goals for this life. Like, that's the kind of workout that I think we all want, right?
Well, and weight loss is a side effect.
It really is a side effect. But when that becomes the focus, then that brings up all the magnetism and all the tension that people have. And I wonder how many people are truly successful if that's their focus for working out.
Right.
And they don't understand anything about energy, what they're really actually creating when they go for those workouts.
Yeah.
But if you really go to be free and to liberate yourself and to be open to new ideas and to enjoy the movement that your body's having, that you can, that you're feeling on all levels of your being, that's the reason that I think many people who live these very happy, aligned, creative lives, prosperous lives, are doing it for those reasons. So those were the 7 questions. And
I think it's important just I'm going to read them
one more time,
okay. Because so people don't have to go back and muddle through. So question 1, what is a difficult or troubling situation in your life? Question 2, how are you creating it or allowing it to happen? 3, what are you pretending not to know? 4, what is the payoff for keeping it like it is? 5, what would you rather be experiencing? 6, what actions will you take to create that? And 7, by when will you take that action? So key questions to ask yourself as you journey into the realm of becoming aware of accepting responsibility for your thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's another great conversation today.
Yes,
really
absolutely.
highlighting and spotlighting the empowering aspects of this part of the journey of taking 100% responsibility. And it takes getting into the journey to start receiving the rewards of the journey. No one else standing next to you can do your journey for you. And so it really has to be you taking action, making the commitment, shifting your consciousness, and wanting to learn more and more about who you really are by the experiences that are your reflections and really your breadcrumbs that you're following to understand you, to empower you.
Yes.
So I want to say a big thank you to all of our listeners for joining us in this awesome conversation about our role as the author and creator of our lives.
Yes.
And truly the 100% responsibility we all must ultimately take for the experiences, energies, expressions, and manifestations in our lives. We invite you to please like, subscribe, and share this podcast or the video on social media. Help us spread the word about Whole Soul School and Foundation and the unique insights, teachings, and messages that we aim to share to inspire the world. Your help is incredibly appreciated. We also welcome you to visit our website at www.wholesoulschoolandfoundation.org and to sign up there to receive our newsletter and important notifications. You can visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and now Instagram. I'm working to keep up with Instagram now, so you can check out our Reminders for the Soul. I'm also posting our videos and our podcast there as well. So if you're somebody who spends time on Instagram, find us there and follow us. And in our Reminders for the Soul, I just want to again just give credit to our mystic poet, Flower Diamond, who's just incredible at how she paints words on the page that are just a wonderful dose of inspiration, usually related to our monthly theme. In your day, in your week. We post those twice a week. So there's a lot of Whole Soul School and Foundation that you can access and utilize if you're on this journey. To shift your consciousness and move into a better, brighter experience of your life.
And to feed your soul, like that's,
to feed your soul.
To help you shift into this, into a place from being the victim to being the creator, shifting into a place of higher consciousness,
shifting into that buoyancy,
that
lightness of your being.
Yes,
that everything feels like it's possible for you and it's finding you in all the best ways.
Right. You want to you want to be feeding your spirit. If we feed our body food, we want to be feeding it good, high vibrational food. If we're drinking things, if we're drinking water, we want to drink high vibrational water. If we're watching TV, we want to be watching things that are feeding our positive energy field.
Yes.
Listening to music, hanging out with friends. We want to, as much as possible. I mean, nobody's perfect, but as much as possible, we want to be feeding our spirit. And Whole Soul School and Foundation's offerings are food for the soul, food for the spirit.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And lastly, please consider making a donation to Whole Soul School and Foundation. You can make a one-time donation or a monthly sustainer donation, all of which truly help us to continue to provide this free content and to consciously create this pathway to greater wholeness, this positive energy and transformation for all of our listeners, including those directly impacted by incarceration. Okay, that's really important to our mission and to both of us, Lacy, right?
Yeah.
We deeply envision becoming an essential and inspirational broadcasting network and global community of positive energy transformation and light, with many wonderful contributors from all over the globe whose lives have been touched by transformation and whose insights from those powerful journeys are ready to be shared with people from around the world. So we envision a variety of multimedia projects, films, and forums that we will launch and establish over time to support and sustain the consciousness of global freedom for all of humanity and all life on this planet. It's a pretty big vision, and I think we're pretty committed.
Yeah.
Right? So thank you To all of our listeners for holding this vision with us, and for those of you that are able to financially contribute to this vision, we thank you. And I want to thank you, Lacy, and thank you to our amazing audience here, and all of our supporters and our listeners for joining us. So thank you.
Absolutely.
And we wish all of you a wonderful week filled with blessings. Have a great day, everyone.
And take responsibility.
Woohoo!